I hope that he wasn't scared, that it all happened pretty quickly for him. Once you get married, all of a sudden it turns out to be a different person in some respects. Was the song really about reconciliation? Did John Denver's most iconic ballad come from a fight? Not love? And why did Annie finally speak out now at 78? Fans thought they knew everything about John Denver. But for years, Annie kept quiet, until now. In a stunning 2022 podcast interview, she opened up about their love, their painful split, and the truth behind the music. Today, we're diving into the heartbreaking, beautiful, and often scandalous truth behind the Denver marriage. From the first love letter to a chainsaw, truth about Annie's song finally told. For nearly 5 decades, Annie's song was held up as one of the most beautiful love songs in American music. Tender, haunting, and poetic. Most believed John Denver wrote it during a moment of joy and passion, a glowing tribute to his first wife, Annie Martell. But recently, Annie herself, now 78, shattered that illusion. During an emotional 2022 appearance on the Mobituaries with Mo Roca podcast, she finally revealed the truth. Annie's song didn't come from a honeymoon moment, it came from pain. According to Annie, the song was born in the aftermath of one of the couple's many arguments. It wasn't the product of passion, it was reconciliation. John had left the house after a difficult argument and gone skiing alone in Aspen, Colorado. As he rode the Ajax ski lift, suspended above snow-covered pines, something changed inside him. The silence, the solitude, and the reflection on their fight brought a sudden clarity. That's when the melody came to him. He rushed home, still in his ski gear, and within 10 minutes, the lyrics poured out of him. It wasn't a slow process, it wasn't calculated, it was raw emotion, an apology wrapped in harmony. Annie later called it a prayer more than a love song. It was written after John and I had gone through a pretty intense time together, she recalled, and things were pretty good for us again. This completely changes how we hear the song. Every note, every word isn't just about love, it's about fighting to keep it. It's about standing at the edge of something breaking, then choosing to come back. For Annie, it was deeply personal. Even now, decades later, long after their 1982 divorce and John's untimely death in 1997, she confesses that hearing the song still brings her to tears. "I still cry when I hear it," she said softly in the interview. And yet, despite her emotional reaction, it's not even her favorite of his songs. That honor goes to, perhaps, Love, a duet John recorded with opera legend Placido Domingo, another song born of vulnerability, longing, and honesty. What's most surprising, though, is Annie's continued emotional connection to the song and to John. She hasn't tried to rewrite their history or smooth over the rough edges. Instead, she tells the truth about it, about the highs and the heartbreak. Because behind every verse of Annie's song lies not just love, but struggle. The kind of struggle that happens when two people want to hold on, but don't know how. What adds another layer of complexity is the fact that this song, so public, so universal, was about a private moment that only the two of them truly understood. To millions of fans, Annie's song was a romantic anthem. But for Annie, it was a glimpse into one of the most fragile periods of her marriage. She later described the song as something that belonged not just to her, but to the world. And yet it was also deeply hers, a symbol of what they once had, and what fame, pressure, and time slowly dismantled. Still, Annie has never spoken of that time with bitterness. Instead, her voice carries a mixture of affection and acceptance. Like someone who understands that love stories don't always end the way they begin. Her honesty in the interview stunned longtime fans. For years, she had remained quiet, almost invisible in the shadow of her ex-husband's legacy. But when she finally spoke, she told a story far more human and complex than anyone expected. Of course, one song, even a perfect one, can't save a marriage. And in the case of Annie and John, it wasn't a lack of love that tore them apart. It was something far more destructive: success. The pressure of fame, the endless travel, and the growing distance between them proved to be more powerful than even the most beautiful lyrics. And Annie would later admit that she lost more than her husband. She lost herself. But what really tore Annie and John apart wasn't a lack of love. It was the life that came with fame, the fame that crushed their marriage. John Denver didn't just become famous, he became a household name. With hits like Take Me Home, Country Roads, Sunshine on My Shoulders, and Rocky Mountain High, he wasn't just topping charts. He was embodying the soul of 1970s America. But for Annie Denver, the woman standing quietly behind the man on stage, the dream became a slow-motion unraveling. She watched as the man she married, the sensitive, soulful guitarist who fell in love with her flannel shirt and penny loafers, transformed into a global star. And with every spotlight that shined on him, Annie faded further into the background. At just 20 years old, Annie Martell married John Denver, who was only 23 himself. They were kids when they stood at the altar in 1967. They barely knew who they were as individuals, let alone as a couple. Within a few short years, they were thrust into a lifestyle that neither of them could have prepared for. Red carpets, sold-out concerts, endless travel. And through it all, Annie was expected to smile, stay supportive, and quietly endure the chaos. Over time, the Annie who loved Minnesota's quiet winters and handwritten letters from a young folk singer started to vanish. "I didn't know who I was anymore," she later confessed. "I lost my identity in his world." The world saw John Denver as the ideal partner: gentle, romantic, grounded. He sang love songs and saved wildlife. But fame has a way of distorting even the best intentions. And behind closed doors, the marriage began to suffer. The long days apart became weeks, then months. Annie waited while John toured the world, chased awards, and became the face of folk country music. The connection that once came so easily, the letters, the laughter, the quiet walks in Aspen, turned into silence, missed calls, and unspoken resentment. They tried to find each other again, but it was like reaching across a widening chasm. John himself admitted the damage his career had done to their relationship. In a 1983 interview on The Russell Hardy Show, just a year after their divorce, he reflected with surprising honesty, "I think my success and my commitment to the work that I do certainly had an effect on Annie's and my relationship," he said. "I think over the last 4, 5, 6 years, we started drifting away from one another. It wasn't just about time apart. It was about emotional distance. There was an inflexibility when we got back together to sort of integrate the other's life into our own. They had both grown, but in separate directions." Annie, for her part, later described their downfall as inevitable, given their youth and the speed of John's success. "We were too young," she said simply. "Too immature to handle it." The whirlwind that swept John to stardom left her clinging to what little normalcy she had left. And when the fame faded, the silence was deafening. What many don't realize is that Annie chose not to fight the divorce in the public eye. She could have told her side, exposed the cracks and scandals, but she didn't. For years, she stayed silent, guarding the sanctity of a love that, for a time, had been real. It wasn't until decades later that she revealed the emotional truth that fame didn't just damage their marriage, It erased her from her own story. Annie became the woman behind the man, the subject of a hit song, a name in liner notes. But behind the scenes, she was a young woman drowning in the wake of another person's dreams. And yet Annie's story doesn't end with heartbreak. There was one moment, one incident during their split, that captured just how badly things had broken down. A moment so jarring, so emotional, that she never spoke about it publicly until now. Still, despite everything, Annie never spoke publicly about the darkest moment of their split until now. The chainsaw incident was real. It sounds like something out of a movie. Unreal, symbolic, exaggerated. But make no mistake, it happened. During the final stages of their divorce, John Denver took a chainsaw to the marital bed he once shared with Annie. Not a figure of speech, not a poetic metaphor, a literal chainsaw. The same man who wrote Annie's song, the ballad of peace and passion, was now sawing through furniture in a rage. And for decades, fans couldn't quite believe it. But according to Annie, and even John himself, the story is all too true. The moment didn't come out of nowhere. There had been mounting tension between the former couple as they untangled years of shared property and emotional baggage. By the early 1980s, their love had decayed into something volatile. According to sources close to the couple, the specific incident that sparked John's fury involved a set of beloved trees on their Aspen property. Trees Annie allegedly had cut down without consulting him. For John, a devoted environmentalist and passionate nature lover, it felt like a betrayal. The home they had built together in Aspen was more than just a house. It was a symbol of everything he cherished: the mountains, the solitude, the earth. When those trees came down, it struck a nerve he couldn't ignore. And so, in a fit of anger and heartbreak, John grabbed a chainsaw. He stormed into their bedroom and began to carve through the bed. It wasn't just destruction. It was theater. It was grief. For a man who could turn emotional turmoil into lyrics, it was one of the few times he expressed it with violence instead of music. He wanted to split the life they once shared, literally and symbolically. Their love was over. And John made sure the world, or at least Annie, understood that with roaring gasoline and a trembling saw blade. Years later, John didn't deny it. In fact, he owned up to far more than that one incident. In his 1994 autobiography, Take Me Home, he confessed to being emotionally unstable during their breakup. He admitted to violent behavior, to moments of rage, to losing control. The chainsaw wasn't an isolated outburst. It was part of a deeper unraveling. John also revealed other troubling truths in that book: his struggles with alcohol, his depression, and even physical aggression in his relationships. The public saw the gentle poet. The private man, as he finally admitted, was more flawed and fragile than anyone suspected. What's remarkable is how Annie handled it all. She didn't go to the press. She didn't hold a press conference or give tabloid interviews. She didn't try to tear down John's image, even when she had every right to. Annie kept her pain and John's darkest moments to herself for decades. Not until 2022, during her Mobituaries interview, did she allow a window to open into that chapter of her life. She didn't bring it up for drama or revenge. She brought it up to show that even the most poetic men can be overwhelmed by the collapse of a dream. She wasn't trying to ruin John's legacy. She was simply sharing her truth. And her truth is complicated. Despite everything, Annie still speaks of John with a quiet tenderness. She doesn't deny the chaos, but she also doesn't let it define him. In her words, there's both hurt and healing. Maybe that's why she kept the first love letter he ever wrote her. Maybe that's why she never remarried. Maybe that's why, despite everything, she still cries when she hears Annie's song. But this next detail reveals just how deep her love and loyalty ran. Because buried in Annie's private life, long after the chainsaw and the heartbreak, was one small, surprising object. A letter. and she kept it all these years. But even with all this turmoil, Annie chose not to John's image. Instead, she chose silence. Until she opened her heart again in a podcast decades later. She still kept his first love letter. Some memories are too sacred to throw away. For Annie Denver, now 78, one of those memories sits quietly on her desk. The very first love letter John Denver ever wrote her. Decades have passed since they met, married, and ultimately divorced, but that single piece of paper remains. She doesn't just keep it tucked away in a drawer, she keeps it visible, present, and close. In her 2022 interview on the Mobituaries podcast with Mo Roca, Annie softly confessed, "I keep it on my desk now. It still moves me to see it." That one sentence, simple, unadorned, holds the weight of a love that changed her life forever. It all began in the most unexpected of places, a small college campus in Minnesota. Annie Martell was a sophomore at Gustavus Adolphus College in 1966. Just an ordinary student participating in a light-hearted campus musical. John Denver, then still going by his birth name, Henry John Deutschendorf Jr., was performing nearby with the Mitchell Trio. After the show, he joined a group of students helping out with the play. Annie wasn't in the spotlight. She was the girl who walked across the stage holding signs for Act 1 and Act 2. But for John, that was enough. He later told her he remembered every detail: her blue jeans, flannel shirt, and penny loafers. That night, something clicked. Not love at first sight, perhaps, but the start of something real. After that brief encounter, they didn't see each other again for months. But John began writing her letters. Sweet, thoughtful, and sincere. Annie would respond in kind. In a world before instant messaging or social media, they built their early relationship the old-fashioned way, through pen, paper, and vulnerability. These weren't just love notes. They were glimpses into their hopes, insecurities, and dreams. Those letters created a foundation that would support them through the whirlwind of John's rise to fame, and eventually, through the heartbreak that came after. Annie has kept many of those letters, but the first one is the most important. It represents who they were before the spotlight, before the tours, before the magazine covers, before the marital bed became a battlefield. That letter came from the boy who fell in love with a girl in flannel and saw her as his muse, not just his partner. For John, Annie was a grounding force, someone he could write about, sing to, and run home to when the world became too loud. For Annie, those letters were reassurance in the chaos, a reminder that before he was John Denver, he was just John hers. But love, as we've seen, doesn't always protect people from life's harder choices. Holding on to the past doesn't shield someone from the pain of the present. In fact, for Annie, preserving that letter only made one of their biggest decisions even more bittersweet: the decision to adopt. After years of struggling with infertility, Annie and John made the difficult choice to build their family through adoption. They welcomed 2 children, Zachary and Anna Kate, into their lives, both deeply loved, both symbols of the life they tried so hard to hold together. And yet, looking at that old letter today, Annie knows that it came from a time before the disappointments, a time before the press, before the pressure, before the fame that chipped away at their intimacy. That letter doesn't lie. It's a snapshot of innocence, of pure intent, of 2 young people who believed love could conquer everything, but life taught them otherwise. Love is powerful, yes, but it isn't always enough. But holding on to the past didn't mean she forgot the pain. In fact, the love letters only made one decision more painful: adoption. Why they adopted, and what it meant. For all the music John Denver gave the world, perhaps the quietest chapter of his life was also the most heartfelt. His journey into fatherhood, but it wasn't an easy one. John and Annie longed for children, and for years they tried to conceive without success. Infertility, though rarely discussed publicly, deeply affected them both. It was a private sorrow, one not written into lyrics or broadcast interviews. But behind closed doors, the pain was real. For Annie, it was particularly isolating. While the world saw her as the muse behind John's greatest hits, she was silently mourning the family they couldn't have naturally. And for John, who always believed in building a life rooted in love, the absence of children felt like a missing verse in the song of their life. Eventually, they made a decision, one rooted in love and acceptance. They would adopt. It wasn't a fallback or second-best option. It was, for them, a new beginning. In time, they welcomed 2 children into their family, Zachary John and Anna Kate. These were not just additions to their home. They became the heart of it. John once said in an interview that the moment he held Zachary for the first time, everything changed. He no longer measured success in albums or awards, but in bedtime stories and quiet mornings. The joy of becoming a father was so profound that he wrote a Christmas song for his son titled, "A Baby Just Like You." The lyrics are simple and pure, filled with the kind of sentiment only a new father could express. He even included the line, "Merry Christmas, little Zachary," capturing a personal moment in a public song. Annie embraced motherhood with the same quiet strength she showed throughout her life. She created a warm, grounded home in Aspen, Colorado, a place where her children could grow up surrounded by nature, stability, and unconditional love. After her divorce from John in 1982, Annie remained in Aspen and continued raising Zachary and Anna Kate. She didn't remarry. She didn't chase a career in the spotlight. Instead, she focused on being a present, steady mother in a world that often felt unstable. Her bond with her children never wavered, even as John's life took him in different directions, both personally and professionally. What makes Annie's devotion even more admirable is how she never let bitterness seep into her parenting. She never used her children to get back at John. There were no tabloid accusations, no messy custody battles. Instead, she nurtured her family quietly, with grace and patience. Even when John remarried, Annie remained the pillar in her children's lives. She could have told them stories of heartbreak or disappointment, but she chose to teach them love. And perhaps that's what makes her journey so moving. Not just that she became a mother through adoption, but that she protected that role with such dignity. Meanwhile, John's second marriage played out very differently. In 1988, he wed Australian actress Cassandra Delaney after a brief courtship. Their marriage was marked by turbulence from the start. Though they had a together, Jessie Bell, the relationship quickly deteriorated. Delaney later described John as controlling and emotionally volatile. They separated just a few years later and divorced in 1993. It was a stark contrast to the steady, if painful, ending of his first marriage. With Annie, there had been heartbreak, but also respect. With Cassandra, the rupture was swift and public, and while she stayed out of the spotlight, John's second marriage would be far more turbulent and brief. The second wife called him a bully. To the public, John Denver was a symbol of warmth. His voice carried hope. His lyrics painted landscapes of peace and home, and his round glasses and boyish smile seemed to represent everything wholesome. But behind closed doors, the man who wrote love songs was far more complex. For Cassandra Delaney, John's second wife, her short-lived marriage to the legendary singer was anything but poetic. In her words, John wasn't the gentle soul millions adored. He was, as she later described, a vindictive bully. Their story began in Sydney, Australia, where John met Cassandra, an up-and-coming actress and singer. He was charmed. She was intrigued. It seemed like a chance at a fresh start for the artist whose first marriage had ended in quiet sadness. They began dating in 1985, and by 1988, they were married. The following year, they welcomed their daughter, Jessie Belle Denver, but the joy was short-lived. The cracks in their relationship began to show almost immediately. Unlike Annie, Cassandra wasn't content to stay silent. Over time, she revealed the painful truth behind their brief union. John could be angry, controlling, and emotionally volatile. Their Aspen home, once a symbol of peace and nature during John's years with Annie, became a battleground of tension and mistrust. Cassandra later recounted incidents that painted a picture far removed from the kind-hearted environmentalist fans knew. She spoke of his unpredictable temper and his emotional manipulation, behaviors that left her feeling isolated and suffocated. Unlike Annie, Cassandra didn't have the same long history or quiet loyalty. When things broke down, they shattered. The couple officially separated in 1991 and divorced 2 years later. It was fast, explosive, and public. But Cassandra's claims weren't just bitter words from a scorned ex. They aligned with other, more visible patterns in John's life, patterns that the public had started to notice. By the early 1990s, Denver was no longer the clean-cut icon of the 70s. He had begun to spiral. He was arrested for driving under the influence, not once, but twice. In one of those incidents, he crashed his Porsche into a tree while intoxicated. He pleaded guilty and was placed on probation, but the damage was already done. His once pristine image was unraveling. Following these incidents, the Federal Aviation Administration revoked his pilot's license, citing his substance abuse. For a man who found solace in the skies, losing his right to fly was devastating. And yet, even this didn't stop his decline. Beneath the surface, John was struggling. He battled depression, self-doubt, and what some described as a deep sense of insecurity. His autobiography, Take Me Home, published in 1994, pulled back the curtain further. In it, John candidly admitted to substance abuse, emotional instability, and even physical violence in past relationships. The revelations shocked longtime fans, but for those closest to him, they weren't surprises. They were confirmations. Still, despite the chaos of his second marriage, one name never left John's heart entirely: Annie. He would later say that there was something irreplaceable about her. She was, in his words, the one who understood me before everything got complicated. He continued to send her flowers on her birthday and on Mother's Day, even after their divorce, even after marrying and divorcing Cassandra. It was as if part of him never let go of the woman he had written a song for while riding a ski lift in Aspen. And yet, the man who spiraled in his second marriage remained strangely tethered to Annie until his final flight, the last words they ever shared. Some goodbyes don't sound like farewells until they become final. For Annie Denver, the last conversation she had with her ex-husband wasn't planned to be their last. It was just another phone call. A brief moment between two people who had once shared everything, and in some small ways, still did. But what was said in that quiet exchange would haunt her forever. As she later recalled in the Mobituaries podcast, it began the way their conversations always had in later years. Gently, almost cautiously. She thanked John for the flowers he'd sent her, as he did every birthday and every Mother's Day, even long after they'd gone their separate ways. But this time he didn't just thank her back. "But Annie, I love you," he said. 4 words, simple, unguarded, and weighted with everything they'd lived through. Love, loss, mistakes, forgiveness. Annie's reply came just as gently. "I love you too," she told him. Neither of them knew that would be the final time they'd speak. There was no closure planned, no dramatic reconciliation, and no rehearsed farewell. It was just a moment of truth between two people who, despite everything, had never truly stopped loving each other in some quiet corner of their hearts. After everything, the fame, the distance, the divorce, the chainsaw, the second marriage, what remained was that one line, "I love you." Shortly after that call, on October 12, 1997, John Denver boarded a small experimental aircraft near Pacific Grove, California. He had long been passionate about flying, a hobby passed down from his father, a decorated Air Force pilot. But that passion had become complicated. Following his drunk driving convictions, the FAA had restricted his flight privileges. Still, John had found a way back into the sky, though not without risk. That day, as he performed a series of touch-and-go maneuvers over Monterey Bay, something went terribly wrong. The aircraft plunged into the ocean. He was 53 years old. For Annie, the news was devastating. The man who had once written Annie's song in 10 minutes after a fight, the man whose voice had filled stadiums and later her children's bedrooms with lullabies, was gone. And yet, something in her already knew. The last call, the way he had said those words, felt like a goodbye disguised as love. She was left with only memories, a desk drawer filled with letters, photographs from Aspen, and the song that would always be hers. Even now, decades later, Annie's song still brings her to tears. Not just because of what it meant then, but because of what it still means now. It was like a prayer, she once said, and prayers, even whispered long ago, tend to echo. Annie never remarried. She stayed in Aspen, the town that had once brought so much peace and beauty into their lives. She raised Zachary and Anna Kate with a quiet strength, refusing to let her past define her, but never pretending it didn't shape her. Unlike many who become linked to a celebrity, Annie never chased cameras, never gave tell-all interviews for profit, and never tried to rewrite the past. Her silence, for years, spoke louder than any headline. But silence doesn't mean there wasn't pain. Behind the calm exterior was a woman who had loved deeply, lost publicly, and chosen dignity over drama. In choosing grace over bitterness, Annie became her own kind of legend, one forged not in fame, but in quiet resilience. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your favorite John Denver memory in the comments below. Want more untold stories behind legendary artists? Watch the next video on your screen now. There's always more than meets the eye.